recording. And here we go. We're off to the races. So you want to reply as soon as possible with your response. Don't even think about it. Just as soon as you think about it, as soon as you come up with an answer, type it in, enter it. As fast as possible.
Oh, that's cool. Yes, I like that.
Okay, we're getting a mixed bag. So if I basically, I don't want to post responses, but someone did not have Grammarly in play on their web screen when they were doing this, because cause would have, yeah, I think the answer was laws. In any case, we're split, ethics and laws. That's what we're split on, ethics and laws. And the answer is ethics. Ethics is centered upon a group of communities' belief system, what they consider to be the norms, okay? So ethics is like a communal idea of what's right and wrong. And that is a broader, bigger picture than laws. Laws happen when the collective, all right, the collective group says, okay, you know what? We think it's wrong to kill people. And we can't just say that's a belief of ours. We need to put some teeth in this. So there ought to be a law. Have you ever heard that saying before? There ought to be a law against this. Have you ever heard anybody state that? There ought to be a law against discrimination. There is. There ought to be a law against fraud. There is. Right? Now, you can believe that personally, and that's a matter of ethics. It has to do with everybody's sensibilities about what's right and wrong, and it changes. It can fluctuate depending on the community. Here's a good example. It's all right to exterminate Jews. Now, I want to say very quickly that these are not the opinions of Professor Timothy Kentop at the University of the Virgin Islands. It is an example of how a community, a society adopted a set of beliefs and ethics that endorsed genocide. And they're not the only ones to pursue genocide, are they? There's a long history of people pursuing genocide with terrible effect. And we can look in the mirror. If we're citizens of the United States of America, there are periods of our history that are very troubling about what we did for practices, right? Okay, and you don't have to dig very far to find that, right? Does everybody understand what I'm saying? If you've ever heard the sense, there ought to be a law. When there is a law, a group of legislators propose a law, and then it's ratified, it's approved, right? Then it's signed. In our case, we have a very specific form of government. In other nations, states, the process works a little differently, but basically we have two houses. You know, in England, they have Commons and Lords, right? We have Senate and Representatives. And then when they agree on how a law should work, they send it to the chief executive of the United States of America. Who's that? Who has to sign that before it becomes law, actually? The President of the United States. And what happens if the president doesn't agree? And he says, yeah, I'm not feeling this. I don't want to do this. Can the president's decision be overwritten? Yes, it can. According to our form of government, our legislature, our US Congress can say, oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't. Now, not one person gets to do this. If they have a 2/3 majority, they can override the veto, right? A veto. Now, what's considered a pocket veto is if the president decides, I'm not going to sign this, right? So he doesn't take action deliberately to say, oh, I don't like this, because that looks bad. But what he does instead is he leaves it on his desk. He never signs it. He never gets around to it. And that, you know, it's called a pocket veto. Now, I'm not a political science major and I'm oversimplifying, and yeah, I know there's finer points, and so please no calls or emails from our political science faculty. In any case, the thing I want you to understand is that laws are formal and they're a statement. Now, can you have unethical laws? Absolutely. Can you be ethical and at the same time be breaking the law? The reverse of that. Absolutely. But I want you to consider that in a sense, ethics is the bigger picture. A subset of that are laws that are derived from ethics, from a community, a collective, right? And that's a smaller definition. There are a few things that are so ethically strong that people say there ought to be a law. They draft a law, they make it formal, they put it in writing. Now, on a local organizational level, we said those are called what? What's the equivalent of laws for a local organization? Okay, so standards are used to draft this in a correct manner so that the requirements are met. So standards are recommended criteria in order to meet, it's a P word. Policies, yes, give the man a cigar. Policies. Thank you very much. So policies are an organization's law, and if you break a policy, what can happen is instead of going to jail, you could what? Get demoted, get disciplinary action, reduction in pay, get fired, all that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so there are penalties. Usually there are formal penalties. That's another way of deciding or determining the difference. You can do something that's unethical, and that doesn't mean you're going to get caught. It doesn't mean you're going to have to pay a penalty. It doesn't mean any of that, right? And unfortunately, it's also true that if you break a law, you don't always get a chance to get a penalty. Now, here's a quick fact, and I just want to talk about this because it's not in your textbook, but it's incredibly important that you understand this. And I did some advanced studies in this area. Guess how many people who commit a crime? Now, I'm talking about everybody. Let's take a particular crime. Let's talk about identity theft, right? Or let's make it a violent crime, just crime in general, okay? Take your pick. Of 100,000 individuals worldwide who commit this crime, let's pretend that there are 100,000 individuals who commit this crime, okay? Guess how many actually end up being reported to law enforcement so that they are investigated?
1,000.
It's not a bad guess, 10,000. So 1 in 10 end up being reported and logged by law enforcement. Now, are you ready for this? Of the 10,000 that are reported and logged by law enforcement, guess how many actually end up with a criminal charge where somebody is arrested? Not a bad first guess. It is 1,000. 1,000 out of 10,000, right? 1/10 are reported. Then of the ones that are reported, 1/10 of those result in an arrest. Are you ready for this? Of the arrests, of the 1,000 that are arrested, this was a global study. This was research. Of the 1,000 that are arrested, how many actually end up going to court? 1/10, 100. 100 cases end up actually going to court in front of a judge or a jury. Are you ready for the last part? Are you? Are you ready? Are you ready? You know where we're going with this, right?
Yeah.
Of the 100 that actually make it to court, would you care to take a guess how many actually result in hard time and conviction? 10. Now, what was the original number? 100,000. Now, this was just like a general study that was conducted by a leading research institution. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but they were very credible about their research. And what they concluded is that it's a miracle that most citizens really try to do the right thing, and they really try to get along with others, and they really try not to break the law because they don't really want to go to jail. Now, here's another quick story for you. I have one more quick story for you in case you've just heard this and you think, hey, that life of crime I was considering, now that I'm going to be cyber enabled, I really want to do that. Okay. So before we go into the summary here, I got one more story to tell you. And I don't know if I've told you this one yet, but you remember Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
Adam and Eve. Did I tell you about Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
Did I tell you how Adam must have looked incredibly goofy? Because it's like, dude, okay, so the serpent tripped Jane, or Eve, I'm sorry. I was thinking of Tarzan and Jane. No, that's a different scenario. Adam and Eve, the serpent tricks Eve. Eve takes the plunge, does what she's not supposed to do. And so I'm thinking what isn't written in the Bible is a conversation that ensues right after that between Eve and Adam. Are you with me? So I want you to picture in your mind's eye, we're in the Garden of Eden and Eve is sitting there munching and crunching on this fruit and her eyes are opened and she is enlightened about all sorts of things she's not really supposed to worry about, but now, okay. And she gets the sense that she's naked. So she has this sudden urge that she ought to hide herself or clothe herself because before then she didn't have any sense of exposure. Talk about your ultimate exposure. We've been talking all through this course about exposure. Do you have a sense of exposure? Do you feel naked when you're connected to a public network? If you're on Wi-Fi anywhere in the public, you should feel naked, very exposed. Not just naked, but naked. There's a difference. When you're naked, you don't have any clothes on. When you're naked, it means you're exposed and something bad's going to happen and you might actually be interested in whatever. Anyway, then there's some ethics that gets involved. Now, let's get back to Adam and Eve. Second story I want to share with you. Why is it that a lot of people don't turn to a life of crime, given the statistics I shared with you in the first story? It goes something like this. Adam approached Eve, and I'm guessing, if I'm a sensible, logical man, he probably said, Eve, have you lost your mind? What were you thinking? You know what God said about the tree. You know what's coming next. And she goes, you know what happens next? She smiles and she goes, I'm still breathing, Adam. I'm not dead. The serpent said, God didn't tell us the whole story. And here I stand, enjoying this fruit. And it's luscious. And I know things you don't. Na, 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 na. And you need to taste this, right? So here's Adam thinking, yeah, okay, why isn't she dead? What's going on here? After a point, did God actually lie? No, no. Satan told a half-truth. And a half-truth, this is why we're talking about this. When we talk about law and ethics, there's some things that aren't going to be in your textbook, and I want you to know for sure and for certain. I need you to sign a code of ethics for Friday's class. I'm going to put it in front of you, and I'm basically going to say that you know the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. And you know that if you're given certain knowledge to do things, right, to investigate, that you will use your skills, knowledge, and abilities, your KSA, your knowledge, skills, and abilities that you get for the rest of this class, because we're going to tune it up and tear it up and torch it. We're going to have some fun for the rest of the class. Before you do that, I want you to be informed, and I want you to sign a statement that says you get it and you will abide by the criteria and standards that are promoted in this class, right? Now, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve did get in trouble. Every criminal that has ever gotten over the first time, it's that Eve moment where the criminal thinks, oh, I got away with this. And then it feels good. And then it tastes good. And then there's extra money. And then you go out and you buy a new Porsche or a new house, or you're the life of the party. And everybody is popular and loved as long as the Benjamins keep flowing. $100 bills, y'all, right? Just shower with the C notes, right? Everybody's having fun until you get caught. And that's the problem, is that people get caught. Sooner or later, they do get caught. It's probability. There's another wrinkle in the universe, and it's called probability. And sooner or later, you're going to flip a coin, and it's going to come up tails instead of heads. So don't think, and this kind of rattles around in the back of people's minds when they're talking about this stuff. Now, what I want to do for the rest of the time, I want to actually get through all these slides, but I did want to take a time to tell you 2 specific stories. I want you to reflect on the statistics. 100,000, 10,000, 1,000, 100, 10. OMG. And guess what? There are societies and nations where that ratio is actually far worse because it's lawless or there's anarchy, right? There is an order of law. They don't have that kind of thing, all right? The other thing I'd tell you is the other dynamic of this is people get looped in, hooked in, drawn in, sucked in, tricked, betrayed, bumfuzzled, conned, swindled into complying with something that isn't quite right. Here's a great example. I'm going to bring in, I still think I have this somewhere in my office. I have 2 discs. One is called, it's the Bruce Willis movie where he dies. And he's like, yippee-ki-yay. Yeah. It's a very popular movie, and there was a big hacker in there that hacked the federal system. Live Free or Die Hard. Live Free or Die Hard. Live Free or Die Hard. I have 2 discs. I have a legitimate Live Free or Die Hard disc. Yeah. And then I have one that's bootleg. And I got one from a student. A student! A student brought it into my shop and said, hey, guess what I scored over the weekend? This is out in theaters. And he had a disc already. And it looks and plays just like the real movie, right? What do you think happened before I got a chance to see this? Do you think that disc just kind of sat there in the room untouched by others? Oh no, there's this handy little program called Handbrake. Handbrake lets you like rip the videos off of encrypted movies and stuff. No, you don't need to look up Handbrake right now. Don't go there. Handbrake, yeah, all right. So in any case, it has peaceful ethical uses, Handbrake. But the point is it wasn't long before I blinked and I turned around and it was cool, right? It was a cool thing to share music and movies. Last story, true story, fun story, sort of. With God as my witness, one of my former students, when the internet was first coming online with digital circuits, they were called T1 lines. Everybody used modems, but the hottest, latest, greatest thing was having a 1.54 megabaud line to the backbone of the internet. It was called a T1. And I set up a lab with NASA funds in the Carolinas to have an internet lab, and I taught internet technology in high school, in another life, in a galaxy far, far away. Now, one of my best students hacked the lab. He was a 9th grader, and he walked in, and as I started the class, he said, hey, Special K. See, my nickname was Special K when I was a high school teacher, teaching physics and chemistry and internet stuff. And, you know, I was kind of loony and a little nuts, right? So they called me Special K, like the cereal. Okay, there's just some background there. And no, if you look out on Facebook or you try to use that to hack any of my accounts, it'll be a dry well. So too bad, so sad. Anyway, I don't use that information anywhere on any of my profiles. But I'm sharing this with you openly because I want you to know the background. This kid was gifted and he said, hey, Special K, I have something to show you. And then everyone else in the room smiled and I thought, oh, brace for it. And as I watched, each screen went black in 1-second intervals, in order, all around the room, just like around the clock. They all went black. They all went blue screen, and then they went black. 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, just like the song, right? 5, 6, 7 o'clock, yeah, 8 o'clock rock, right? All the way around the room. He hosed the entire lab. I wrote a letter of recommendation for him 4 years later so that he could attend USC, Computer of Engineering, under a full scholarship, and he got that full scholarship. 1 semester later, he was disciplined by the Dean of Student Affairs for running a media sharing software package that was very popular back then, where you could get music and movies and put them out there and share them sort of BitTorrent style, right? And the company did this legitimately under a valid license, but then was later, they were later prosecuted for causing all kinds of problems, right? I'm not talking about Netscape, but it's an N name. And I don't want lawyers calling me up, so I'm not going to mention it on this video. But I will say that it was a very popular, very overused application, and it was used to bootleg music. He was caught in his dorm room on the campus backbone with 35,000 music tracks. And because of that software, Napster. Did I forget to mention Napster? Okay, well, anyway, so he had this machine, and oh, here come the campus police.
Yes. We've been caught, boys.
And I had a word of prayer with him. I said, what were you thinking? And he goes, hey, the recording industry, they're all crooks. They've been caught, embedding rootkits in their CDs. So when you try to rip their music, it infects your computer. And that's true. And they were caught price gouging and price setting, and it's called racketeering. That's the same thing the mob and the mafia does. That's also true. And they were convicted, and they were fined over $1 billion. I'm talking about you, Sony, BMG, Sony. Yeah, okay. So here he was, like Robin Hood, thinking he was really cool. True story. Third and last story, icing on the cake story. Fast forward 2 years later, he's no longer in his program. He managed to dodge that bullet. He got back into his studies, but then mysteriously, 1 semester later, dropped out. Dude formed a rock band. James Cameron, the director, and I'm talking James Cameron like Titanic, the movie Titanic, James Cameron. Yeah. James Cameron. They started a rock group. You ever hear of Hootie and the Blowfish? Right on the heels of Hootie and the Blowfish, their group was a rising star. It was called, I'm not even going to mention their name, because here's what happens. Then people hear the rest of the story and they'll start looking up names, and they'll go, who was where? And here's a Kentop, and they'll connect the dots, and then I'm going to incriminate myself. And I'm not going to do that, because this young man is actually a fine, upstanding, tax-paying citizen who actually at this point in his life does everything he's supposed to. But here's what happened. The director of the Titanic approached their band and said, I have a new movie. It's like a musical. I want you to do the soundtrack, most of the soundtrack exclusively. And I want you to record it in Vancouver, British Columbia, in the same music studio that Bon Jovi did all their albums. And we're gonna get rich. And you know what he did? He quit school with his band members, and he went to British Columbia, and he recorded the soundtracks, and he went on tour. Fast forward 1 year later. Are you ready for karma? Yep. I said, how's it going? Oh, the band folded. Why'd the band fold? Well, it turns out that our stuff was so well liked that it got out on the internet, and what happened? Everybody bootlegged it, and there weren't any sales, and they couldn't pay for the contract for the recording studio. And since they couldn't pay for the contract for the recording studio, there were no royalties whatsoever. So the same thing, what comes around goes around. Now there's one last phrase I want you, and this is 25 years of cyber experience talking at you. It's not in any textbook. I have one last thing I want to share with you. And then we are going to blitz those screens. I want everybody to repeat after me. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I want you to repeat the last part like we're at a football game, okay? I'm gonna say, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I want you to say you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can does not mean you should. Right, okay. End of stories. I want that phrase to rattle through the back of your brain the rest of this week, especially when you sign the code of ethics.
So we can't hack.
To be continued.
Nice.
All right, so here's what we're gonna do next. Now, it is a true story, and I do gotta find a way to change the names to protect the innocent, but I'm pretty sure he would not mind the fact that I'm sharing a story. It's an amazing story. And it's a true story, and it actually happened, and I had a front row seat the whole time. So if you ever wondered how this stuff can boomerang on you, OMG, OMG. All right, so here we were. Everybody with me? We were talking about civil law, weren't we? And we mentioned the name of a famous actor, an athlete who got in trouble, and it was a big, highly publicized criminal case. O.J. Simpson. Yes, we were talking about O.J. Simpson, and we said, okay, the criminal law, he was exonerated, rightfully so. There was evidence tampering. This was proven. This was our justice system, and it worked. He was later sued in a civil lawsuit for damages associated with the things that happened to his wife. And that case was successfully prosecuted. Well, it was successfully represented by the plaintiff, the family of Nicole Smith Brown, I think that's her name. Anyway, the point is that you have different kinds of law. You have criminal law, you have civil law, and then you also have something called case law. We said who or what creates case law. Does anybody remember? This is really important. I want to make sure you know this. How is case law or precedent created? Somebody does something. And no, it's not associated with an actual law, either criminal or civil. I mean, that's in the mix in the background. Is it the legislature who passes the law where case law originates? Which branch of our government is responsible for manifesting judgment? Just judicial branch, yes. Okay, so I was trying to draw a hint. Remember that when a court case goes before a judge or a jury and a decision is rendered, depending on the merits of that case, it can hold the weight of law because it establishes what's known as precedent. Okay, and there's amazing things that have happened in the United States of America as a result of proper precedent.
Oh, so that's why like people like whenever they're talking about like an instance of something, they would quote like the name of the court case.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, so Jadel was saying, oh, that's why they bring up all this stuff about a court case. They say, oh, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1953. This is why separate is not equal. Come on, in Kansas, separate school systems, they were not equal. People in Kansas were disenfranchising a serious portion of their population. And this is American history. It's not a pleasant part of American history. Another part of American history is that the 101st Screaming Eagles, the Airborne Division, were ordered by Eisenhower to descend upon Kansas to push back the Kansas National Guard because the Kansas National Guard was blocking the attendance of a colored student under a court order. They were like, oh, no, you're not doing this. And the president of the United States said, oh, no, you're not. This is not a states' right issue. This is an American issue. And the Supreme Court has ruled. And we are about the order of law. So the 101st Airborne Division, the guys that were involved with the invasion of Normandy, the people who pushed back the Nazis, were called in to push back the Kansas National Guard. Shame on the Kansas National Guard. Shame on you. Like I said, ethics, law, two totally different things, right? Now, where are we going with this? There are all sorts of things that are playing out now in front of our eyes, and the social networks are a huge problem. Put another way, people are figuring out how to hack our entire society by putting out misinformation on our social networks so they can influence elections by brainwashing people. It's already happened. It's not only unethical, it's illegal. And they've already thrown some people in jail, okay? And they need to keep doing it. Oh, here's the point. All right, so private law focuses on individual relationships. Public laws govern regulatory agencies. private law. You could have like Disney World. Everybody's heard of Disney World, haven't you? Yeah, did you know that Disney World has like its own jurisdiction, law enforcement, all that kind of stuff? Did you know most universities have their own jurisdiction? Yeah, you knew that, right? Okay. Now, here's a fun part. Where does some of this crime come from? It's motivated by money. Money makes the world go around, the world go. This is it's not all that jazz. Liza Minnelli was in this very famous movie with Joel. Never mind. Anyway, money. It's all about money. Did I tell you the story about how Chinese are making jets that look just like the Dreamliner and Boeing? Okay. And did you know that Boeing is one of the largest defense contractors on the planet? And did you know that Boeing has a cybersecurity division, and they opened up a cybersecurity center in Charleston, South Carolina, right down the street from where my son lives? Have I told you this? Did I tell you that they have 200 vacancies all the time in their cybersecurity center? Did you know we know some people at Boeing personally? I'm not making this up. Okay. What did Boeing do after their Dreamliner? After the plans for their Dreamliner were hacked right out from underneath them, what did Boeing do? They came up with something, an invention called the Black Phone, Boeing Black Phone. Now, this is something I do want you to look up. Look it up, the Boeing Black Phone. This phone is a really cool phone because you know what the phone contains when it's powered off? Nothing, absolutely nothing. There's no firmware, there's no Android OS, there's no applications, nothing. Do you know what happens when you turn on the Black Phone? It downloads a pristine, sterile copy of a virtual, it's in a sandbox. You ever heard the term sandbox? Has everybody ever heard the term sandbox?
Yeah.
They put everything on that phone in a big giant envelope, a big sandbox, and they download it onto the phone, and then people use the phone to talk securely so they can't be hacked. And then when they power it off, guess what happens? It's all gone again. This is supposed to prevent hackers from getting into their Kool-Aid like they did. Yes. Yes. Suleiman has 2 questions. Yeah.
What's the boot time for that phone?
Well, that would depend on your bandwidth and whether or not you're a Verizon customer doing 5G. No, I don't own stock in Verizon. I would never do that. Okay. I don't, yeah, that's not a free promotion. Actually, there's a big contest about 5G. It all depends on the bandwidth. That's a great question. Yes.
The statement is Windows 11 has its own, it comes with its own sandbox.
Yes. So Sulaiman just mentioned that Windows 11 it comes with its own sandbox, and I'm guessing you can use it to like test or do things with new applications to see how they behave. And that's long overdue, and that's welcome news. Yeah. Oh, and as soon as they get something that can't be hacked, just wait for it. Wait for it. Sooner or later, somebody figures out how to hack it. Okay. Intellectual property. Most of the, and I want to be honest with you, there's a huge swath of crime that's committed because it's a new way of perpetrating the same old crimes. Theft, identity theft, right? It's the same con. It's a swindle. People are duped, and then they click on a link, and then boom, all their identities, their identities messed up. Some of this is crime, and yeah, there's an unlawful, unethical thing to it. The other part of this is economic. Nations steal from nations. APT number 1, advanced persistent threat, when somebody is a live, active, malicious actor or actress, they are called an advanced persistent threat. If you have an APT number, that's a badge of honor because it means that the entire world ranks you among like the top 100 cyber criminals. If you are APT number 1, you are truly blessed because the entire Chinese government stands behind you. APT number 1 is a member of the Red Army. And it's his job. And he's very good at it. And he is on the FBI 10 most wanted list. APT number 1. Don't you want to go to Hong Kong for a vacation? APT number 1?
Yeah.
Just, enjoy some casinos, go on a cruise. Don't you want to like take a walk on the wild side? Anyway, our chances of getting our hands on APT number 1 are pretty dubious, right? In any case, national security, trade secrets, and a variety of other state and private assets has led to a passage of several laws that restrict information. Now, here's another thing I want to share with you. There's been a tug of war going on between privacy and national security. It started with 9/11, and it ended with, well, it didn't really end. It became extremely interesting with a guy by the name of Snowden. Snowden was a defense contractor who was given all sorts of extra access and privilege to classified information, and then he saw what our government was doing with it. He discovered that our government was using new technology to spy on our neighbors, even our allies, even our citizens. So he got irritated, and he thought the right thing to do was to grab 1.3 million classified documents and disseminate them out on the World Wide Web. Snowden lives in Russia now. And a guy named Putin is
Hey,
protecting
Professor.
Snowden. Yes.
Yes, so I always wanted to ask you this question. So did you feel what Snowden did was the right thing to do?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because right after he did it, I had a Wired magazine in my hand. I sat down on a plane next to a brand new Air Force recruit for the Air Force Academy. And he said he was going to be working in the cyber division, the new branch of the military. He was going to be working in our cyber force. And he asked me, he said, what do you do? And I told him. And he goes, oh, you work with crypto, you work with nukes, you did all this stuff. And then you do work with healthcare when they had to protect medical. Oh, you've been doing cyber. And I said, 25 years, or 20 years at that point. I said, 20 years. He goes, tell me about Snowden. Do you think he's a good guy or a bad guy? And I said, he's both. The truth is that he is both. He made decisions to take action to address something that was wrong, unlawful, unethical, just plain wrong. The trouble is that he chose a way to do it that destroyed and damaged American interests far beyond any good he would have brought from that. He deserves to die in a gas chamber or in front of a firing squad if we ever lay hands on him, because he is a traitor to the American people. And he could have used his head, and he could have had some sense about what to do as a steward of that opportunity. Kind of like the Kansas National Guard. Shame, shame. Okay, so now you've had the full baptism about law and ethics. Let's move on so we can get this done. Just remember that the most important thing to take away from this is just because you can doesn't mean, okay? Now I'm going to finish these summary slides before our time is up. But then I'm also going to post these if they aren't out there already. And I want you to look at chapter 5 and chapter 6 and the slides, because there are finer points. And there's all sorts of laws, and those laws are always changing. And the thing that you need to understand is that the law is a living, it's an adaptive, it is always in a state of flux. And in order for you to be effective in cybersecurity, you got to stay on top of the latest. Okay? As part of an effort to encourage ethical behavior, many professional organizations have established codes of conduct, or what? Everybody look at me. Codes of ethics. Hello? Codes of ethics. We come full circle, don't we? Okay, so if you're looking at this, you understand. Studies have determined that people of differing nationalities have varying perspectives on ethical practices with the use of computer technology, and some thinks it's okay to hack other countries and to steal their secrets. Did you know that this is encouraged? Yeah, in other countries, see, we're among the nations that have, and there are a lot of people who live in a big part of the world that have not. And one way to balance the scales is to be Robin Hood. And this is where our biggest challenge is, quite frankly. They will find, those that do not have will find the Achilles heel. They will find your bad habit. They will find your weakness. They will find what you're embarrassed about. They will find the things you don't want anyone else to know. And then they'll suck you in, they'll dupe you, they'll trick you, they'll have you use your cyber skills so that you become one of them. It's like the dark side of the force, okay? And I'm just saying that there's a lot of similarities here. The important point to remember is that there is a code of ethics, and one of the hardest things to do is to wield your cyber skills among your friends and family. Because like any good doctor or any good lawyer, when your friends or family have a problem with their stuff and it involves cyber, one of the best things you should do is to recuse yourself. Do you know what recuse means? You say, you know what? I know you're going through a divorce with my brother-in-law, and he's a jerk, and I've seen how he abuses you. But if I get on his phone and I get in his laptop and we uncover something real nasty, it's going to put me in a jam, and it's going to put you in a jam. I have someone I know that would be objective, that would be professional, that would be ethical, and I'm going to recommend them. One of the most important things you need to be able to do is to know when to say when and duck out.
It's why doctors cannot work on their loved ones.
It's why doctors cannot work on their loved ones, and lawyers shouldn't represent their own family members because they're too vested. And that's part of the code of ethics. Part of the code of ethics, right? Now, several US federal agencies are responsible for protecting American information resources and investigating threats against them. Did I not mention that anybody who receives US government funds is subject to the standards and requirements, laws and regulations, mandates of the US federal government? Yeah, that's most everybody in the US Virgin Islands, I'm just saying, all right? So in case any of you are wondering why we keep talking about NIST and all that, right, okay. All right, so here we go. I'm gonna turn this loose. I'm gonna send you these resources. I want you to dive in and dig in, and on Friday, I need you to bring a pen. Bring a digital pen or a pen. Bring a digital pen or a pen on Friday. Because we'll need you to sign off on some basic statements of what's good and what's bad, and you understand, and you're not going to do it, because if you do it, Professor Kentop's going to find you, because there ought to be a law against using cyber good for cyber evil. All right, that concludes our class today.